Hi everyone, it's Ajanette and I am here to hopefully finish this chapter. So we're moving on to dissociative disorders. Dissociative means like a splitting apart. So literally their personality can break apart, their memory can break apart. They're often as a result of anxiety or stress. This is the one group of disorders where the psychoanalytic their therapeutic approach or the psychoanalytic approach really kind of makes sense. And I'm not a huge Freud fan, but definitely in this group of disorders, it makes sense. It's like your psyche unconsciously steps in to protect you without your conscious involvement or knowledge. So there's different types of dissociative disorders. A dissociative amnesia is a splitting part of the memory. So you fail to remember the past and you've just kind of disconnected with certain parts of your memory. Dissociative fugue is a combination of dissociative amnesia, and then on top of that, you wander away from home. Something stressful may have happened, and you kind of wander away. You don't have a memory of the past. It's very different than like PTSD. People think, well, if there was a trauma and they have a disorder after the trauma, it's because it's got to be PTSD. No, not always. PTSD, typically they might have concentration issues, but they don't like have amnesia where they forget parts of their past. Dissociative fugue does involve kind of wandering away. In the most extreme cases, they can start their life over, maybe completely have a different family and kind of reinvent themselves. Depersonalization disorder is kind of like when you're outside of yourself. I guess I can liken this to being high. Not that I've ever personally experienced that, but sometimes you feel like you're outside yourself watching yourself in that high. You're kind of estranged from you, and that's depersonalization disorder. Imagine that just on a constant basis. There's no psychoactive drug to explain it. You just feel kind of disconnected from yourself. And then finally, dissociative identity disorder, more commonly known as multiple personality disorder, where you literally split your personality into multiple personalities. Quite often, one personality doesn't have knowledge of another personality. Particularly the host personality often doesn't have conscious knowledge of the other personalities. The other personalities emerge and develop as a protective mechanism, maybe as a result of trauma. If you ever watched One Life to Live, there was a really great depiction of this. Vicki Buchanan was also Nikki Smith, and she was molested as a child by her father. And quite often child molestation is one of the triggering causes of this disorder. And she manifested a completely different personality. As Vicki, she was kind of vulnerable and a victim. As Nikki, she was empowered. She was a survivor. She was hard. She wasn't that daddy's little princess that did everything he said. She was a rebel. She was promiscuous, everything that Vicki wasn't. And so the goal of therapy is to kind of fuse these personalities and integrate the personalities, because to some extent they all represent a different component of yourself. On average, people with this disorders can have 15 personalities or more. As I mentioned, that they often don't know about one another, or the alter personalities might know, but the host doesn't. They can move between personalities suddenly. It usually involves some sort of memory lapse. They can be triggered by stress. They lose those periods of time. So if there were other personalities controlling the body, I don't have any memory of what took place while they were in control. More often this is found in women than men. And I will tell you, this is very controversial. A lot of people dispute its existence, and they really feel like this might emerge as, some suggestive disorder where the therapist suggests that it's there, and so they kind of split apart based on that guided suggestion. And so more of a kind of it's developed through therapy more so than diagnosed through therapy. So again, very controversial. Personality disorders are disorders that show very inflexible personality traits. They're maladaptive. They usually display impairments in their social and professional lives. And we often think of antisocial personality disorder as kind of like the poster child for disorders. We typically think of like Charles Manson and the serial killers who are dangerous, but it doesn't always have to be somebody that's physically dangerous. Bernie Madoff actually shows characteristics of a personality disorder as well, antisocial in particular. He has a very clear sense of kind of grandiose identity, and like he thinks he's better than other people. He's charismatic, charming, no sense of guilt or remorse for his actions, and he's able to benefit at the despair of others. So antisocial personality disorder, we also know them as sociopaths or psychopaths. So when people say they're antisocial, it's like, not really. Just because you're not sociable doesn't mean you're antisocial, because that word has some pretty serious significance in psychology. They experience very little personal distress when they harm others or when others are suffering. There's kind of four main things to look out for. Very egocentric personality. The world revolves around them. They might consider themselves to be superior and entitled, and they may look down upon others. They lack a very clear conscience. They don't show a lot of remorse or a sense of empathy toward others. And when they do, it might be an artificial empathy. They can be very impulsive and do bizarre things suddenly, and you're like, what was that about? And they can be very charming on a superficial level, but when you get to know them, you might recognize that there's some concerning aspects of their personality. They typically are really great salespeople. They're very manipulative, and they can kind of woo someone on the surface and win someone over and make that person respect them for their intellect and their influence, but ultimately they can become very agitated with people that they can't control and they can't manipulate, but they're able to quickly discern people's weaknesses and prey upon those, and so they can identify easy targets and easy victims. And again, it doesn't always have to be a physical harm that they're causing. It could be emotional, psychological, financial. Some causes are genetics. We do see that this does tend to run in families. People who lack empathy and connection, might also come from parents that lack empathy and connection. They have lower levels of that autonomic nervous system response that we talked about in the stress chapter. So you and I might be stressed and triggered, let's say on a severity of something that happens at a 6. But their anxiety, so our anxiety might go up here at, let's say, a car accident, or let's say we accidentally bumped into someone at the grocery store, and I might feel really anxious and stressed about that, and so I have a response to, let's say, an 8. They might not have any response at all. They need higher levels of stimulation to have any response in their autonomic nervous system at all, so they don't get that stress response. I don't know about you, but I'm stressed out. If I have to hit someone. I remember when my sister and I were younger and we got in a fight, and my dad put us toe to toe and said, hit her. And it was time for me to hit my sister, and I couldn't. I started crying. I was breaking down. It was like stressing me out. Like, no, I can't do this, and I feel so bad. And he said, if you don't hit her, I'm going to hit you. And I still couldn't do it. And so then he turned it over to my sister, and he said, okay, hit her. And man, she didn't even hesitate. She just smacked me right across the face. And then I was like, all right, bitch, it's on. And so we started smacking each other. And of course, I'm like, my autonomic nervous system is elevated. I have this stress response. But somebody that's antisocial may not have that kind of stress response. They may need to do more than smack someone to feel that engagement and connection. And so what they consider to be kind of mild, the average person may consider to be, more exceptionally rude or inappropriate or cruel or just mean. And so keep that in mind. They do have some right hemisphere, which is largely our emotional hemisphere, and they do have some lower activity levels in that area. They do have reduced gray matter, so their frontal lobes don't have as much cortical tissue, which is the problem solving and impulse control area as well. There's some environmental factors that tend to be consistent, including coming from abusive backgrounds where they may have been exposed to severe child abuse or neglect, or they had very inappropriate modeling, somebody that demonstrated a lack of empathy. Often you see signs in childhood of maybe cruelty to animals, and they had they were emotionally deprived. They weren't given a sense of connection and love and empathy from those around them. Borderline personality disorder is the most common personality disorder. You're more likely to see this among your friends than any of the other disorders. Some of those symptoms include impulsivity. They are very unstable. So this is like you're hot, then you're cold, you're yes, then you're no, you're in, then you're out. This is the Katy Perry song. I love you, I hate you. You're my best friend, you bitch. It's that kind of very erratic. Like 1 minute they're having a great time laughing with you, and the next minute you're the enemy, and they're pulled away and disconnected from you. We quite often see that instability in their relationships, both of a romantic nature and of their friendships, and it often stems from an unstable self-image. They're desperately insecure. They need that kind of acceptance. They're lacking that self-acceptance within themselves. And as a result, they don't trust in other people. And so they can be chronically lonely and experience depression and just a sense of solitude. And this intense fear of abandonment drives them to be so erratic in relationships. And so it essentially pushes people away. So it becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy where they make it happen, what they were most afraid of. Very destructive, impulsive behavior. Often when you see cutting, the first thing that I think of when I hear someone's a cutter is borderline personality disorder. They might engage in other destructive behavior like promiscuity, unsafe sex, risk-taking, drinking, things of that nature. And they often think in black and white, absolute terms. I love you, I hate you. No, I love you, but I'm upset with you right now. So they don't have often a middle ground. And again, that childhood history of abuse or neglect is very common and prevalent. They often come from a background of childhood sexual abuse, so that could be problematic. We do see that it runs in families, so if you have a family member or parent, you're more likely to develop it. And then again, they have that functioning challenge in the frontal lobe and limbic system, which is responsible for emotional regulation. Do show some responsiveness with therapy, but it has to be intense, and they do have a high risk of relapse. So the final slide here is just really addressing the fact that often there's this overlap between sociological, biological, and psychological factors that contribute to psychological functioning. We can see this when we look at different rates of psychological disorders across cultures and different symptom expression across cultures, and those differences might exist between gender as well. So that definitely helps us to understand that there are sociological factors at play with psychological disorders, although the primary emphasis in the current world is often focusing on the biological causes. Make sure that if you are diagnosed or a loved one is diagnosed, they're not just taking medication. Medication combined with therapy is the most effective approach to any disorder. Also, don't self-diagnose. Be sure that you're going to a professional that's trained and licensed, and they will make sure that they're doing a comprehensive assessment to diagnose appropriately. take care of you and take care of those you love.